The diner's neon buzzed like an anxious insect over the wet asphalt, a trembling halo that turned each puddle into an unsteady mirror. Iola Granger stood under that light with her tote bag against her ribs and the ache of the November cold in her wrists, deciding whether to dare another refill of hot water and a corner booth. She had slept the night before in the church vestibule until the janitor found her and left a paper cup of coffee without looking her in the eye. She had thanked him anyway, in a whisper. Inside, the heat fogged her glasses and made her eyelashes prickle. The place smelled like burnt sugar and bacon grease. A song from 20 years ago sighed on the radio, a thin harmony beneath the clatter of plates. She counted the steps to the far booth, 11, and eased herself down, knees stiff, tote settling like a small animal beside her. She touched the laminated menu as if it were a holy text that might open to mercy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Iola ordered hot water with lemon. The young waitress, freckles like faint constellations, filled the cup and a second one without being asked. You take your time, the girl said, and Iola heard the promise inside it. No one would rush her until the manager counted tiles or the night turned meaner. The men at the long table by the window had arrived an hour earlier, bringing with them the smell of wet wool and cheap aftershave. They spoke in a language of elbows and laughter too loud for the size of the room. Their jackets were black with gilt thread names stitched above the heart, brands Iola didn't recognize. They weren't boys, not exactly, they were the sort of young that had already learned to be cruel because fear was expensive. The leader's jaw was a square of stubbornness and cheap rings flashed when he chopped the air to make a point. They called him Vinny. At first it was just noise. Then it sharpened. Old folks got no business taking up real estate, one of them said, not quite looking at Iola but making sure the remark flew like a dart across the glossy vinyl. Iola stirred the lemon slice around and around, watching the pale rind drift like a moon in winter water. She had learned the skill of being invisible after the year the city gave up on rent control and her landlord did not. She had learned to read voices like weather. These boys smelled like hail. Come on, man, the freckled waitress murmured, setting ketchup down near their plates like an offering. Let's keep it easy. Vinny smiled without humor. We're easy. He looked at Iola then, direct, letting her see herself inside his boredom. You sleeping here, Grandma? The word was a knife with a ribbon, and Iola took it without bleeding. I'm drinking water, she said. The voice that came out belonged to a former choir singer, steady, with a touch of alto. Her throat still remembered pitches even if her body forgot warm beds. A busboy, barely more than a child, stared at the floor and dried the same spoon until it reflected his worry like a polished coin. In the kitchen, a timer beeped and the cook swore softly through his teeth. The radio song ended. The diner's neon flickered once and held. Iola kept her eyes on the lemon, because looking at the boys made the room tilt. She named her fears in order, like beads on a rosary: police who didn't arrive, police who arrived badly, a push that turned a hip bone to powder, a word that cracked the waitress like glass. She reminded herself to breathe. She had not eaten, not really, since the Tuesday the shelter ran out of cots and called it overflow. She had a packet of oatmeal in her tote, a toothbrush, 3 folded photographs, a Bible without the maps in the back, and a little plastic bag of buttons that had fallen from coats she patched for strangers. Leave her, the boy with the spoon said, so quietly Iola almost didn't hear it. Vinny's friends didn't hear it at all. She said thank you to the lemon, to the waitress's freckles, to the steam rising like a benediction. Gratitude required no permission. The door chimed. It was a modest little bell, the kind you'd expect on a bakery where the pastries were sugar like snow. It chimed again, and then again, until the bell was a metronome and the air changed. Leather entered first, the smell of rain-dark jackets and motor oil and road, that special perfume of places most people only counted on maps. Helmets swung from hands. Patches stitched in white and black with the kind of certainty that needs no introduction. The men and women moved as if gravity obeyed them out of respect. They didn't speak as they filled the booths, not even to each other. 40, Iola counted without meaning to. Math was a village habit, and though she had lost her address, she had not lost her arithmetic. The Mongols' MC patches were quiet on their backs, a chorus of insignia that said what the mouths didn't. The waitress's eyes grew round and then softened, as if some private prayer had been answered in a language she didn't know she knew. Vinny laughed and raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "Look at this, movie night." No one from the new arrivals looked at him. They looked at the menu, the specials board, the waitress as though she were made of something more important than bone. One of them, a woman with a braid like a rope and eyes you'd count on in a flood, glanced at Iola and then away, small as a nod in a crowded church. Another man took off his gloves one finger at a time and lined them up on the table like punctuation. The leader arrived last, as some men do not to prove supremacy but because they belong to time differently. He was broad-shouldered, his years written not as defeat but as margin notes, scars that had learned their lesson, lines that kept secrets without resentment. He removed his helmet and set it down with care on the seat beside him, the visor catching a slice of neon and returning it as a calm star. He saw Iola in the mirror of the window before he turned his face to the room. In that reflection she watched him see her, the same way she'd once watched thunderheads notice a cornfield. Recognition isn't always memory. Sometimes it's just the feeling that you've kept a place for someone you didn't know would arrive. The waitress approached him like a student approaches a blackboard question she knows the answer to but fears she'll mispronounce. "Coffee? Please." His voice was low, made of gravel and apology. "And whatever keeps your hands steady." Vinny had gone quieter by then, quiet like a flame realizes the room is smaller than the fire. He leaned back in his chair and it made a noise too loud for how fast he was thinking. His friends traded glances, that small loud conversation of boys assessing the shape of a storm. One elbowed another and mouthed, "Cops?" Another mouthed back, "Not cops." A nod moved through them like an unwilling prayer. Iola wrapped her fingers around the cup and let the heat travel into her bones. She studied the leader of the Mongols' MC out of the corner of her eye, because to look too long at anything that might help you is to risk watching it vanish. He had a scar on his chin shaped like a comma and that made her strangely hopeful. Commas mean there is more. The cook came out from the kitchen and stood with his big hands on the counter, a man built to lift grief from someone else's day. He had a tattoo of a sparrow that looked like it might fly if he turned fast enough. The busboy abandoned the polished spoon for an unbroken stare at the coffee machine. Sometimes you keep the world small to keep it from spilling. "Hey boss," Vinny said to the leader, swagger draped over uncertainty. "You and your choir want to sing somewhere else?" We were having a private conversation. The leader did not look at him. He looked at the waitress. "Do you have pie?" "Blueberry." "And pecan." "Pecan, please." "For the room." He slid a card across the table. The waitress took it in both hands as if it were a newborn. The bell chimed again, smaller now because the door didn't need to announce anything further. The booths were taken, every one of them occupied by people who had arrived together without a parade. Helmets lined up on the window ledges like moons in different phases. The rain had settled into a private conversation with the roof. Iola remembered something, no, not a memory exactly, not a scene, more like the feeling of a hand on the small of her back 22 years ago, guiding her through traffic after a concert when she still had a house key on a sunflower keychain. The hand had belonged to a man who sold transmissions and knew 3 recipes perfectly. He had died at 2:17 in the morning without waking her, and after that, time folded and unfolded like laundry you never finish. Her daughter had stopped calling. The job had run out of hours. The mortgage had been a mouth she could no longer feed. Where do you set down a life when the shelves are gone? Vinny spread his hands like a magician. "Lady," he said to the waitress, "we're not paying for no biker field trip." "You aren't paying for anything," she said, soft and scriptural. "You've been nursing that coffee for an hour." The leader finally looked at Vinny then, not as a man looks at another but as a bridge engineer looks at a crack and decides whether it's cosmetic or catastrophic. "Son," he said, "eat your eggs." "I don't have eggs." "Then order some." It should have been a joke and wasn't. The room exhaled. Somewhere beneath the counter, the radio found a new song and kept the volume low as if it had learned manners. Iola drank. The citrus bit her tongue, the heat soothed her throat, and the first swallow felt like a promise keeping itself. She adjusted the tote strap and pressed her knee against the table to remind her body it still had edges. The leader's gaze passed over her and didn't stop, and then the woman with the rope braid stood and made a kind of periphery pilgrimage, pretending to check on the napkins and the sugar caddies. When she reached Iola's booth, she placed an extra lemon slice on the saucer without a word. Iola looked up and found gray eyes, the color of road beneath winter. "Long night?" the woman asked. Iola considered the ways to answer that question and chose the narrow truth. "Long enough. Name's Mara." "Iola." Mara nodded as if she had expected that. "Okay, Iola. Well, you let me know if you want a real tea bag." She lowered her voice until it was just a shape between them. "Or if you want me to sit." Iola did not want to need anything. But she wanted that. Vinny scraped his chair back. His friends tried to scrape theirs in rhythm, and it sounded like a garage band failing to agree on the first beat. He stood and rolled his shoulders as if he were about to throw something heavier than himself. "This is stupid," he announced to the room. "Nobody tells me where to sit." The leader didn't tell him. He didn't move at all. One of the other MC members, a man with a voice like winter pine and shoulders like a porch, spoke in a language that sounded like enough in many dialects. Vinny heard the meaning if not the words. He sat back down. Mara slid into the booth across from Iola. She did it like you enter a hospital room, with a smile that knows better than to pretend everything is fine. "We're not here for them," she said, jerking her chin at Vinny's table. "We're here for pancakes." Pancakes seem wise. Wise and round. Hard to argue with a geometry like that. Mara lifted the menu and pretended to read it. "You warm enough?" "I am." She wasn't, but the lie kept the world small. The second lemon slice bled a brighter scent into the steam. Outside, a patrol car idled at the curb and then kept going. The waitress delivered 3 plates to the MC booth nearest the door without spilling a drop and looked relieved to be observed succeeding. Vinny's friends took out their phones as if authority might be contained on a screen. The leader's people took out their appetites. The cook brought out pecan pies, whole, their surfaces lacquered and sure, and the room began to smell like holidays you don't have to fight about. "Where do you sleep?" Mara asked, not unkindly. "Where the weather says yes." Mara nodded. "We've slept worse places by choice. Makes it complicated, what we think we know." Iola traced the rim of her cup. "Choice is an instrument most folks use without reading the instructions." Mara smiled. "You talk like a book I'd keep." "I'm just trying not to spill." A man in a corner booth, tattoos like sermons, a wedding band polished thin, lifted his fork to signal the waitress. "Another slice here, please. And coffee for the lady by the window." He meant Iola. The waitress blinked as if she'd been waiting all her life to be told it was okay to be kind and get paid for it. Vinny stood again. This time he brought his fear with him like a second jacket. He walked toward Iola's booth, one step, then another, testing whether the floor would argue. "You think you're safe because of them?" he asked, and his chin indicated the black and white patches not as an invitation but as an insult he couldn't afford. "I don't think safety," Iola said. "I think tea." He laughed in a way that couldn't find its ending. "You hear that?" he said to Mara. "Grandma's got jokes." He put his hand on the back of the booth and leaned in, so close Iola could count the pinpricks where his shave had given up. His breath smelled like menthol and something angrier. "How much for the tote?" "It isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale." "Then you wouldn't understand this bag." Mara moved but did not rise. The movement was enough, the room rearranged itself around her stillness. Across the diner, a big man with a mustache that could shelter small birds set down his fork. Another adjusted his chair fractionally to free his right hand. Nobody reached for anything. They just made room for outcomes. The leader sipped his coffee. He didn't look over. He didn't have to. Power like that is a weather system, not a storm, exactly, but the pressure that precedes one. Vinny tapped the booth twice, a drummer's rehearsal. You got family? He asked Iola. I do, she said, and in that second the photographs inside the tote grew heavier, as if they had absorbed the humidity of his question. We disagree about where I should be. I can show you a place, he whispered, and there it was, the hinge, the place where malice tries to pretend it's mercy. Warm. Lots of friends. Mara laughed, but only with her eyes. She already has lots of friends, she said. And this place is warm enough. Vinny balled his hand and flattened it against the vinyl, and when it didn't make a satisfying sound he flushed red, embarrassed by physics. He looked around to see who had noticed his failure and met too many gazes to survive it. He pivoted to the only audience that would forgive him, his own. Let's bounce, he said to his table, as if departure were an instruction instead of an escape. No one moved. He looked at the leader. You following us, old man? The leader set his cup down. You could have mic'd that sound and sold it as a heartbeat. No, son, he said. But I'm finishing my pie. Call me son again. Okay. The leader's eyes finally met Vinny's, and the 2 seconds it took to cross that distance felt like church. Son. The waitress refilled Iola's hot water as if the cup were an alternating wine. You good? She whispered. Yes, Iola said. And then she surprised herself. Could I have toast? Of course. The girl smiled, a small sunrise. Do you want butter? Iola nodded and Mara said, and jam, in the tone of someone adding grace to a poor table. The waitress wrote it down as if it were policy. Vinny's friends argued with their eyes, the way birds decide whether to migrate. 2 of them stood, then sat back down, as if gravity had tugged their shoelaces. One kept looking at the door like it might change shape if he stared hard enough. The leader signaled with nothing but a blink, and plates began to slide down the line of booths, pecan pie, pecan pie, pecan pie, until the slices reached Iola's table and a plate landed gentle in front of her as if laid down by the patient hand of a neighbor. I didn't order, she began. It's handled, Mara said. Some nights you say yes. Iola looked at the pie and saw not sugar and nuts but a geometry of kindness, wedges and radii and a center that held. The first bite stunned her mouth. She closed her eyes to keep the tears obedient. Vinny swore and reached across the table for Iola's tote. He did it because there was nothing else left to take. His fingers brushed the canvas and in that instant the quiet left the room as if pulled by a string. The leader was on his feet without hurry and somehow the hurry belonged to everyone else. He didn't touch Vinny. He just stepped into the space where greed had been about to grow and looked at the boy the way you look at a match before you decide whether the house needs light or burning. You don't want to do that, he said. Vinny's mouth worked. What do you care? About the bag? The leader shrugged. Not at all. About you? He paused long enough to set a table in his voice and invite the boy to sit. More than you think. Something unpracticed flickered in Vinny's face, a child's math problem. If kindness and shame arrive at the same time, what is the remainder? He let go of the tote. Whatever, he bluffed, but his throat didn't believe him. A siren called from somewhere far away, the way bad habits call from old addresses. It dwindled. The radio found a gospel song and dared to be audible. The waitress placed toast on Iola's table and set down butter wrapped like presents you don't have to earn. Thank you, Iola whispered to nobody and everybody. The leader's gaze broke contact with Vinny and drifted, unhurried, toward Iola like a boat returning to the dock it trusts. He picked up his cup, and his hand shook, only a little, but Iola saw it. Fear lives in everyone, the brave just teach theirs to sit. Mara said, You all right? I am now, Iola said, and believed it for a whole breath. The door chimed. A man in a cheap suit walked in, rain on his shoulders like the afterthought of a storm. He scanned the room and settled, immediately, unmistakably, on Iola. He had the pale look of someone who slept under fluorescent lights. The kind of man who wrote memos while his heart wrote IOUs. "Iola," he said, incredulous, as if he'd stumbled into a ghost. "Iola May Granger?" Her chest pinched, the old full name like a bell rung too close to the ear. Nobody used the May unless they wanted something. Mara's hand, palm up, slid across the table like a dock begging a boat to tie up. Iola placed her fingers on it without looking away from the man. Vinny sniffed opportunity the way a stray sniffs a kitchen door. "You know her?" The man smiled with no warmth. "We've been looking." He pulled a folded paper from the inside of his jacket, something official enough to bruise without touching. "There's a matter regarding the property at 221 Hollowell. The notice was posted. You didn't respond." Iola's stomach turned cold. 221 Hollowell. The little house with the crabapple tree that dropped fruit like stubborn stars. Her husband's ashes under the hydrangeas. The last mailbox that had ever belonged to her. She had sent letters to that address long after the locks changed, because hope needs somewhere to go even if it comes back. She swallowed. "You can't." The man shook his head, the kind of movement that pretends to be sympathy and is really just paperwork. "It's been condemned. But there's another matter. The bank says you were sent a check that needs your endorsement. If you sign, we can close it out. If not, it goes elsewhere." He let elsewhere hang like a trapdoor. Mara's grip tightened, bones honest against bones. Vinny leaned forward, eyes bright as a raccoon's. Across the room, the leader lifted his head as if someone had spoken his name in a language he only heard in dreams. The man in the suit unfolded the paper. "We can do it right now. Save you the trouble." He produced a pen. The waitress paled. The cook took one step forward and then remembered there were rules against adopting strangers. Iola stared at the signature line. It had her name printed there in a font that thought it could pronounce her. She tasted lemon and metal. The tote, her tote, suddenly seemed too small to hold what life was asking her to carry. "Sir," the leader said from across the room, not loud, not soft. "Put that away." The man in the suit blinked, surprised to be noticed by the axis on which the room was currently spinning. "This is a private matter." "Not tonight." The leader stood. He didn't loom, he occupied. A hush tightened the diner until even the sugar seemed to listen. "The lady eats. Then you talk. I have a schedule." The man smiled his paper smile. "You understand schedules." The leader held his gaze long enough for schedules to feel foolish. "You'll wait." The man's eyes darted to the patches, registered the organization name, did a long, quick calculus that ended in an answer he didn't like. "Fine. 10 minutes." He slid into a small table by the door and pretended to check his watch while his heart learned the choreography of doubt. Mara exhaled. "Do you want me here when you read it?" Iola nodded. "Please." Her lips trembled around the word and she did not apologize for that tremble. The toast was warm. The butter gave up easily. The pie had become courage by another name. She ate one bite, then another, and the room came back into its correct size. The leader returned to his booth but not to his coffee. He watched the man in the suit as if he were mapping the distance between a cliff edge and reason. Vinny couldn't stand the quiet, it made a drum out of his own chest and he didn't like the rhythm. He stood for the third time, the charm or the curse, and moved to the door as if leaving were his idea. "Let's go," he told his friends, and this time they obeyed. He paused by Iola's table, anger simmering into something meaner. "See you around, Grandma." Mara answered before Iola had to. "You won't." The bell chimed the Gangsters into the rain, and the cold took a breath of the warm room and admired itself in the window. The suit cleared his throat like a judge warming up. 10 minutes, he reminded no one in particular. The leader's eyes moved to Iola and for the first time stayed there. He approached slowly, as if she were a deer and he had learned how not to spook what is already halfway gone. Up close, Iola saw that his comma-shaped scar had a small white thread at the center, like a stitched promise. "I'm Zach," he said. "May I?" She nodded. He sat where Vinny had leaned. The air did not crowd him. "You don't know me," he began, "but I think I know someone who would want me to look out for you." "Who?" The word left Iola before she could hide it. Zach's jaw worked, choosing between truths. "A man named Caleb. He rode with us a long time ago. He kept a picture of a woman in his wallet. Not a girl. A woman. Gray in her hair. Holding a pie at what looked like a church fundraiser." Iola felt the diner tilt. Caleb. Her son-in-law who called her Miss Iola even after he'd been married to her daughter for 10 years. Caleb who had laughed like it was hard work he kept volunteering for. Caleb who had disappeared 2 winters ago when a delivery route ended in a silent warehouse in a car without plates. "He's gone," she whispered. "We don't know where." Zach nodded as if he had feared that. "He wasn't one of us. Not patched. But he helped us, once. A cold night. A van in a ditch. He didn't say his mother-in-law's name, but he said she made pecan pie that could fix a bad month." Zach looked down at the slice in front of Iola and almost smiled. "When I walked in and saw you, it felt like bumping into a story I owed a favor to." Iola's eyes blurred. The man in the suit cleared his throat again, louder, in case anyone had stopped respecting time. The waitress glared at him, a bless your heart that needed no accent. Mara's hand was steady under Iola's fingers. "What does the paper say?" Zach asked. Iola slid it across. He didn't touch it. He read it with his eyes, then with his bones. "They want your signature so they can take what's left," he said, translating bureaucracy into weather. "Is there anyone to call? My daughter would tell me to sign and come stay with her in a house full of rules we both couldn't keep." Iola swallowed. "She has a baby I haven't held yet because shame always remembers the address." Zach nodded as if he had a map that included that road. "All right." He stood, and for the first time his people looked at him as if a sentence were about to be pronounced. "We'll handle it." The man in the suit laughed, a brittle sound. "You'll handle paperwork?" Zach turned toward him. "We'll handle tonight." "Which is what?" "Intimidation?" "I can call." "You can call dessert," the cook interrupted, voice warm and made of hill country. "Or you can wait. Those are your choices." The suit pressed his lips together until they almost disappeared. He tapped his pen as if it were a gavel and he could declare the room adjourned. Iola breathed. The lemon cooled. The butter shone. Outside, the rain lifted like a curtain, and the night revealed itself as merely night, not prophecy. She looked at Zach and felt something uncollapse inside her chest, a tent being raised where weathered ground had taught itself to be sky. The door chimed one more time. A man stepped in, dropping the hood of a parka that had lost its waterproofing sometime during the last administration. He was tall and spare, with eyes like fences, meant to separate, failing at it. He looked at Zach, then at Iola, and then at the suit. He closed the door behind him as if sealing a vault. When he spoke, the room obeyed. "Iola," he said, and the name softened in his mouth into something only one person had ever made it, only one. "Lark." Her breath left as if someone had found the ripcord. No one alive called her Lark. The man smiled without joy. "It's been a long time." He lifted a hand that had hammered nails and written apologies and fed a child soup when the fever broke. The hand shook. Not with fear. With relief. Zach rose, a question forming in his eyes like weather over wheat. Mara's grip turned fierce. The man took one step closer and set something on the table, wrapped in a black bandana soft with use. He unrolled it with reverence. A key. Old brass. The tag attached to it read, in a hand that could not be mistaken, 221 Hallowell, back door. Before anyone could speak, the diner went black. The neon outside sputtered and died. The radio fell silent mid-harmony. In the sudden dark, a hand settled gently on Iola's shoulder and a voice she had not heard in 25 years whispered her childhood nickname. Lark. Lark. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The word floated in the blackout like a match head struck in a cave. Iola felt it catch in the dry tinder of her chest and glow. In the dark, the diner breathed, the good kind of hush, the kind you hear at births in the moment right after a storm admits it's going to pass. Iola. The voice, older now, sanded down by years that hadn't asked permission, moved closer. A palm found her shoulder again, warm as a stove's side. It's Ellis. Her knees loosened. Ellis. The brother who had once taught her to whistle with 2 fingers made of summer, the brother who had left town with a duffel and a debt and a promise to call that he'd never kept. He was the only one who'd ever called her Lark, from the way she used to sing herself through chores at dawn. He had not said her name since the year their mother died. Ellis, she whispered into the dark, and the syllables steadied her like a railing. Phones lit up like small moons, the waitresses, then the busboys, then a dozen more, faces emerging out of shadow, features sculpted by the glow. The outage turned everybody equal for a beat, rich and broke, scared and brave, human by the same brief light. Zach's silhouette stood a little apart from the others, shoulders shaped by roads, head bent toward the man in the suit, who now looked less like authority and more like a bat who had flown into the wrong cave. Mara's hand never left Iola's fingers. Ellis slid into the space beside her, and the key on the bandana knocked gently against the table like a polite guest asking to be admitted. Back door, he said, tapping the tag. Always was the smarter way in. How do you have that? The question carried so many other questions that Iola didn't trust it to hold them all. Ellis blew out a breath that belonged to other nights. I went by after the second notice went up. Thought maybe I could. I don't know. Stand there and be sorry where it mattered. Sheriff's man had already boarded the front. But the back, your maple still shades that stoop. I know how to pry a board without breaking what it's nailed to. His eyes moved to Zach and back. I didn't take anything. Just this. Felt like a promise I still owed you. Iola pictured the back stoop of 221 Hollowell, the one that had swallowed so many pairs of shoes and welcomed wet boots and summer feet and slug-tracked midnight wanderings to the crabapple tree. She'd stood there the afternoon after her husband's funeral, the light falling through the maple like lace, and promised the empty house she would keep it full. That was a long time ago, she said. The confession didn't apologize for the years that had happened without her consent. It was, Ellis agreed. But promises don't know how to read calendars. The cook lit a pair of stubby emergency candles and set them on the counter. Their light made halos on the chrome and turned Zach's patches into small, dense continents. Somewhere behind the kitchen door a generator coughed and thought better of it. The rain that had slicked the asphalt had given up and left the world wet and honest. The suit adjusted his tie like that might restart the power. We should get this signed, he insisted, nervousness threaded through his syllables. Before, we should just get it done. Zach's head turned in the dark, soft as it was, seemed to move out of his way. You can wait, he said again, and there was no argument hidden anywhere the man could find. Ellis cleared his throat. Lark, he winced. Iola. I know I don't have the right to show up on a night like this and hand you keys like they erase everything. But I couldn't let them take what's yours without seeing your face. I thought, his mouth tilted, regret carving a familiar ditch. I thought if you wanted to go see it one more time, I could stand in the backyard and be weatherproof while you went in. The word backyard did something to Iola's ribs, something like opening. She had not stepped on that patch of grass in 2 years. She had not let herself imagine the geranium pots she'd left, the way the downspout rattled in a west wind, the wind chime her neighbor had hung without asking because sometimes blessings arrive like that. I shouldn't go, she said, and the moment the words left she knew they weren't the truth. I should go, she corrected herself, and felt the first sturdy thing she had said in months grow roots under it. Tonight. Zach nodded, as if the world had clicked into gear on a tooth he trusted. We'll ride slow, he said. You can sit in the van. He looked at the suit. You can follow in your car. You don't speak to her until we're done. You don't get to. Mara laughed lightly, a porch chain laugh that knew how much weight it could hold. He just did. The waitress pushed a paper bag across the table. Inside, the toast and 2 slices of pecan pie had been wrapped like offerings. For later, she said, cheeks pink in the candle's honest light. In case later needs sugar. They filed out into the dark that wasn't quite dark anymore because 40 phones had discovered they could make a street out of light. The van Zach had mentioned was a boxy old thing, its paint the color of compromises, the sliding door a little stiff. Mara helped Iola climb in and buckled her seatbelt with the same care she would use for a sleeping child. Ellis slid into the passenger seat as if he were taking his proper place in a family photo long delayed. Zach took the wheel. Engines woke up like large, well-fed animals, one by one, then all together, until the block hummed with their purring. Nobody revved. Nobody announced. They moved the way rivers do when the bank has already learned to step back. Iola's tote sat in her lap, the weight of the photographs suddenly something she wanted. She slid the top one out, the picture from the church fundraiser Zach had described. There she was, flour-dusted, laughing in a kitchen whose linoleum tiles had known whole seasons. She looked at the woman she had been and did not apologize for missing her. Ellis stared out the windshield, profile cut black against the street's weak lamps. "I'm sorry," he said softly, the kind of sorry that doesn't believe it belongs to a category with grievances and replies. "I left. I know what leaving does." "You're here," Iola said. "We all left something. We all came." Mara texted with 2 fingers, unsurprised by the rain-slick foam that tried to leap like a fish. "I've got 2 ahead to sweep the street at Hollowell," she reported to Zach. "And 2 to hang back and be obvious." "Thank you," Iola murmured, not sure whether she was thanking Mara or the road for existing. The van's heater coughed warm air, thin, but real. The world slipped past, liquor store neon, the shuttered laundromat, a bar with a name that promised friendships you could rent by the hour, a mural of a woman with flowers for hair. At a light, a bus pulled up alongside, faces inside lit like a moving aquarium. A boy in a red jacket made exaggerated fish faces at Iola and she made one back. He laughed, pure, and the van felt warmer. Hollowell Street smelled like leaf rot and the memory of barbecue. Even in the dark, Iola could feel where the sidewalk cracked over the roots of the maple and where the curb dipped where kids had turned it into a bike ramp each June. When they rolled to a stop, the house stood ahead not as an enemy but as an elder trying to decide whether to believe that the child returning to it was still worth its welcome. Plywood covered the front door and 2 windows. The crabapple had gone a little wild, branches catching each other like old ladies clucking at a fair. A notice was stapled loud to the trim, condemned, City of Brookdale. The lettering had gone smug in the rain. Iola's hand found the key Ellis had brought, and it pressed its little circle into her palm like punctuation. "Back door," the tag reminded her. They walked single file along the fence line, wet vines making the cedar smell like 1,000 Christmases. Iola's shoes remembered the path her mind had tried to forget. The back stoop was how it had always been, save for the board Ellis had pried so carefully it seemed it might apologize and slide back into place when they left. "May I?" Zach asked, nodding at the door as if it were a person whose boundaries mattered. Iola nodded. She put the key into his hand because she trusted his steadiness more than her grip. The lock turned with a resignation that made Iola's knees weak. The door opened into a dark that was familiar, a dark made not of threat but of the absence of a light switch nobody was paying to feed. The smell hit first, dust and lemon oil, the ghost of spaghetti sauce, the particular ancient sweetness of geraniums that had gone leggy in their terracotta pots. She stepped inside and stopped. Time did not come back, it didn't have to. The room existed without her permission and welcomed her without protest. The table still bore the scratch her granddaughter's plastic pony had made the afternoon of the last birthday party in that space. The magnet shaped like Idaho still held a takeout menu none of them had ever used. On the counter sat 3 glass buttons in a little plastic bag, the extras she'd always kept. Iola laughed, a small, dangerous sound that felt like water finding a blocked path. Ellis hovered near the door, as if anything heavier than his gaze would break something fine. Mara went to the sink and ran the tap. It clanged and then coughed and then yielded a thin, brown thread of water that became clear long enough to let her fill a glass. She handed it to Iola without a speech. Zack stood watch at the window, a dark hinge in the brighter dark. Outside, 2 bikes idled at either end of the block, their riders sitting like patients on saddles, helmets off, eyes doing work. The man in the suit stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets, trying to look like this was simply another address and not a place where people learn to draw breath again. "There's a box in the pantry," Iola said softly, as if the house might be sleeping and she didn't want to wake it rough. "Blue tape along the top. Pictures. If it's still." "It is," Ellis said, almost eager. He moved toward the pantry like a younger version of himself would have, and for a second, Iola saw the boy who had fetched her cookies on a stool too tall for him. He came back with the box hugged to his chest, blue tape grimed but intact. Iola set it on the table and peeled the tape slow as a prayer. Inside lay the flattened lives the last 2 years had taught her to carry as memory alone, her daughter in cap and gown, her husband under a paper banner that read 15 years in letters each cut out by a different friend, a photograph of her own mother, stern and kind, holding a pie she claimed had never failed to set a man straight. "Take what you can carry," Zack said gently. "We'll store the rest." "We?" Iola echoed. "My shop has a lock and a camera that bites," he said. "It's not a home, but it keeps Rain honest." The back door clicked. Mara turned toward it. A new silhouette stood there, thin, jittery, anger wearing a hoodie. Vinny. The street lamps threw his shadow large on the ceiling, as if to show everyone the size he'd been trying to be. "You bring a whole circus to steal from a condemned house," he sneered. "What is this, Grandma, one last party?" His eyes landed on the box of photos and brightened with the bleak joy of mean boys who spot leverage. "Pictures? Those sell, you know. Old frames, vintage junk." Ellis moved in front of the box, body remembering the shape of defense. "Leave," he said, and the word startled even him, as if he'd found it lying on the floor of a younger man's mouth. Vinny pulled something from his pocket. Not a gun. A screwdriver, long and shiny from being someone else's idea. He held it badly, the way people hold tools they've only seen used in movies. "Put it down," Zack said, voice from the window. Vinny laughed. "You gonna make me?" Mara didn't move. "No," she said. "You're going to make you." He shifted his weight, and in that little movement he committed to an ending he hadn't thought through. He took one step toward Ellis, too fast, and the tip of the screwdriver kissed the air where it would have been terrible to let it land. Iola stepped between them because some bodies remember calculus the mind forgets, distance, speed, the honest mathematics of harm and how to change it. She lifted her tote with both hands and swung it not like a weapon but like a bell, catching Vinny on the wrist with the firm, flabby honesty of a bag full of a life. The screwdriver clattered to the floor and spun, pointing itself at different futures worth refusing. Vinny shouted, more out of surprise than pain. From the front of the house came the percussive rush of boots, the 2 riders off their bikes, in and at the door, standing without huffing, as if they'd been storing the breath for exactly this. They didn't touch Vinny. They picked up the screwdriver and placed it on the counter far from him. They opened the back door wider and looked at the boy the way you look at someone on the edge of a pool deciding whether to swim or jump into shallow water. "Out," one said, not unkindly. Vinny swore and went. He did it in a way that let him pretend he had chosen to leave. The door bumped his shoulder and he slapped it like a rival, heading for the front where his friends, less brave without an audience, had arranged themselves into a decision to be elsewhere. Iola's legs remembered being 68 and sat her down hard. Mara was already there with the glass of water. Ellis put his hand on her shoulder, shaking, and she realized in a quiet place that he had stayed, not only in the room, but in his own skin, and that was the braver event. The man in the suit reappeared in the back doorway, face pale in the lesser dark. "We're not supposed to be inside," he said, small. It's a liability. Iola stood because fear had no right to sit when courage was working. Sir, she said, and the sir was not an honor but a comma. You have paperwork. I have a house. I will not sign anything tonight. He blinked. But the check? What check? She asked, and Ellis's head snapped toward her, sharp with a brother's readiness to hear the trap. The suit swallowed. Insurance. A settlement after the city declared the block unfit. There's a clause. He flipped 2 pages with the pushy pageantry of men who've eaten less than they pretend. If you sign, you agree to release the city from remediation costs. The funds, modest, go to you. If you don't, we pursue compliance through the housing court. How modest? Zack asked. The man named a number. It made Iola laugh, a sharp bark that made her seem meaner than she felt. That won't buy a month of quiet, she said. It will close it out, he said, as if closure were a currency you could spend at the grocery. We don't want it closed out, Ellis said before he could stop himself. We want it right. He glanced at Iola, ashamed for speaking as we. She nodded, granting him the pronoun. Zack stepped closer to the man and to the paper both. What happens if she doesn't sign? Demolition. The lien becomes the city's. The house goes down. He looked at Iola. It's not safe. Mold. Rot. A cracked sill. We have pictures. Iola looked around at the kitchen that had fed funerals and birthdays with the same spoon, at the place where mourning had often come early and late with equal generosity. I don't know what safe means to people who never needed a backdoor key, she said softly. But I know the difference between broken and gone. I can live with broken. Zack's eyes softened. We fix what we can, he said. He turned to the suit. She doesn't sign. You let her remove personal property tonight. Tomorrow, you give me the name of the inspector who wrote the condemnation and a copy of the report. I can't. You can, Zack said. Because you'll be asked to. Nicely. He smiled. It was not a threat. It was a promise of paperwork done by a man who could fill out forms without losing his soul. The suit deflated. He nodded once, quick. Fine. I'll email. In the morning. Good. Zack looked at Ellis. What do you want from here? Ellis's eyes widened, unprepared for inclusion. Nothing, he said, then, because honesty had decided it would be brave, her husband's ashes. Under the hydrangeas. The world tilted. Iola's hand found her own throat. You knew? Ellis nodded, guilty and grateful all at once. He told me, the week before. He said, if she asks, tell her under the hydrangeas. If she doesn't ask, tell her anyway. I didn't tell you. I ran. Iola's mouth trembled into a smile that was mostly grief. Then tell me now. They went into the yard, the grass giving underfoot like a remembered bed. The hydrangeas had gone to sticks, ghosts of blue and lace cap and summer bees. Ellis knelt and pushed aside the mulch. He knew the exact flagstone to lift, the small cavity beneath lined with a plastic bag Iola had kept in the closet of 2 sensible things. Inside, the box. Not urn fancy. Just a box that had held Christmas cards once, taped around like a secret wrapped too tight. She held it. The weight was both less and more than memory had guessed. Hello, she whispered to the box, and, because love never memorizes the script and always improvises, I'm sorry I left you outside so long. Mara stood with a flashlight held steady. Zack looked away to give the moment a room of its own. The suit shuffled his feet, waiting for a cue he was not entitled to. The bikes at the block's ends idled quieter, as if engines could respect a hush. Iola carried the box into the kitchen and set it on the table where a girl's plastic horse had once skated and scratched. She rested her palm on the lid and felt the smallest warmth travel back into her, as if the past could be microwaved by courage. We'll store this, Zack said. Tonight at the shop. Tomorrow, we talk to a lawyer who doesn't charge for breathing. We'll look at the report. We'll decide. He met Iola's eyes. You decide. But not hungry, and not alone. The words landed in her with the satisfying weight of a delivered package. Not hungry, not alone. Her life had been a long time neither of those things. A sentence like that deserved a couch and a lamp and a quilt to live under. The house gave a small creak, the kind that houses use to agree. Iola smiled at it the way you smile at a baby who has decided to nap. There were practicalities, a suitcase from the bedroom, sweaters that still held the ghost of cedar, the Polaroid where her husband's thumb blocked the corner of her face like a private eclipse. Ellis found the small spice jar of buttons she loved and tucked it in the tote himself. Mara labeled 2 boxes with tape in a hand that made even temporary look official. On the way out, Iola paused by the door and pressed her fingers to the wall, 2 inches left of the light switch, where her daughter's growth marks had been penciled year by year. The pencil was gone but the dents remained, the indentation habit of celebration. Thank you, she told the dented paint, because gratitude had finally found a grammar that didn't include apology. Outside, the night had decided to forgive itself. Stars tried on the spaces between clouds. The riders at the ends of the block lifted hands in silent question. Zack nodded. Helmets went on. Motors turned sure. The suit hovered by his car like a stork who'd landed on a parking meter. Tomorrow, he said. It came out better than he expected, almost human. Tomorrow, Zack agreed. 10. Ellis loaded the van like penance he was glad to pay. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at Iola. You got a place? Iola opened her mouth and closed it. She had places she was allowed. She did not have a place. Mara leaned on the van door. My sister runs a place above the bakery, she said, casual assault. Short-term rooms. Long-term forgiveness. You can take the one with the window that dreams about the river. We'll put you there tonight. I can pay. You'll bake, Mara said. And tell stories while cookies cool. Iola felt the laugh before she made it. I can do that. She looked down at the box of ashes. And I can set a table. When they got back to the diner, power reborn, neon proud again, the waitress had kept the coffee warm like a vigil. She ran around the counter and hugged Iola before remembering she worked for tips and not for the world she wanted to live in. Sorry, she said, then didn't look sorry at all. It's all right, Iola said. You did exactly right. She put the paper bag on the counter and took out the second slice of pie. For you, she said. For later. The waitress cried in a way that didn't ask anyone to fix it. I'm from Laredo, she said suddenly, remembering the request from earlier in the night. You asked folks to say where they're from. I'm from Laredo. And here. I'm from here now. Me too, Iola said. The truth surprised her into a steadier stance. The man in the suit left without fanfare, a figure adjusted to fit back into paperwork. Ellis wrote his number on a napkin and pressed it into Iola's palm as if numbers could be braver than they usually are. I'm staying, he said. Not with you. Not under the same roof. But in town. I got a line on drywall work and a couch with a dog who thinks I'm okay. Bring the dog by, she said, and when he laughed, she smelled the summer he used to keep in his pockets for her. Zack waited until the goodbyes had folded themselves into tomorrow. The shop, he said. Then Mara's sister's place. Then sleep. He looked like a man who had done the sequence before and knew it worked. At the shop, their shop, for tonight at least, the bikes slept in rows that looked, to Iola's tired eyes, like pews. The air smelled like rubber and oil and something sweeter, the kind of sweetness that sticks to tools when people use them to make things work. Zack showed Iola a shelf near the office where the box of ashes could rest, a clean towel underneath, a space nothing else would ask for. Good night, she told the box. We'll find you a proper place soon. Mara drove her to the bakery building with a radio station that believed in nighttime songs. The stairs up to the room were painted a cheerful red, chipped in the spots where the corners had argued with groceries. The door opened on a bed, a quilt made of squares that did not match and therefore belonged, a small table, a lamp that clicked on with a modesty she respected. A window looked toward where the river must be, the black shape of it smelling like cold and opportunity. "Bathrooms down the hall," Mara said. "Ms. Ortiz, my sister, snores like a well-loved motorcycle. That's how you know you're safe." Iola set her tote down and stood in the center of the room like a person who had finally stopped moving. The ceiling had water stains that looked like countries she did not need visas for. The quilt invited knees. A note on the table read, "Tea in the kitchen, chamomile knows things." "Thank you," Iola said, and meant it in so many directions the word had to split into twins to carry it all. Mara hugged her, a quick, sturdy circle. "Sleep," she said. "We'll fetch you at 9. The lawyer at 10. She paused at the doorway. "Hey. That swing with the tote? Iconic." Iola smiled, embarrassed and pleased and a little proud. That tote has been waiting to be useful. Alone at last, she turned off the lamp and let the city's reflected light wash the room in a gray goodnight. She lay down and the mattress lifted her like a boat. She whispered into the dark, the prayer she'd been practicing without words for a long time. "Thank you for this bed. Thank you for the people whose engines make lullabies. Thank you for the back door key." Morning arrived with the shy thud of feet in the hall and the smell of yeast rising into purpose. Ms. Ortiz knocked once and then opened the door with a tray she'd balanced on a hip that had seen children through flu seasons. "Tea, toast, an egg as soft as a secret," she announced. "You are safe here." Iola believed her faster than she'd ever believed a notice tacked to wood. At 10, the lawyer wore a sweater with elbows that had earned their leather. He was kind in the way of men who know exactly how much help they can give and give it all. He read the report and looked up through his glasses. "They overreached," he said. "The mold is real. The sill is cracked. But they skipped steps. No remediation offer, no relocation help. If you want to fight, you have a fist." "What happens if we fight?" Iola asked. "Time," he said. "Possibility. Maybe even grant money if we shake the right trees. The house might stand again. Or it might not. But you'll decide on a full stomach." "I like him," Mara stage whispered. "He speaks pie." They left with a folder that contained more than paper. In the hallway, Zach looked at Iola as if waiting for the weather report from her bones. "I want to try," she said. "Even if the house never comes back the way it was, I want to be the one to tell it what happens to it." "That's it," he said softly. "That's the sentence." The days that followed were a new kind of long. They cleaned the house in shifts with masks and jokes that pretended not to be scared. They found a letter from her daughter under a stack of cookbooks that confessed a different kind of hunger. They found the leak that had started the damp war in the back bedroom and shut off the valve that had been quietly campaigning for demolition. They found the small, stubborn life still attached to the place, an ant parade, a spider web with one leaf pressed into it like a punctuation mark, and asked it all to forgive them for messing with its arrangements. Vinny did not reappear at the house. He did, however, appear one morning outside the bakery, hands in his pockets, eyes less feral. He took off his cap when he saw Iola as if he'd remembered a rule from a nicer book. "I wanted to say sorry," he muttered. "For the thing with the bag." Iola considered him. "You have people?" she asked. He shrugged in a language that had learned to avoid nouns. "A friend. Maybe." He glanced at the bakery window where Ms. Ortiz had written today's special, "Second chances in the loopy hand of women who refuse to give up their whimsy." "I could wash pans." "Start with the outside chairs," Iola said. "Then we'll see about pans." He did. He scrubbed with the ferocity of a person trying to earn a verb to replace the ones he'd been given. Ms. Ortiz paid him in cookies and dignity. Mara paid him in instructions he could survive. Zach paid him in the way men do when they decide to stop being mirrors for each other's worst days. The city sent a new inspector. She wore steel-toed boots and listened more than she spoke. "We can save it," she said finally, hands in back pockets, eyes on the sill. But you need a plan and people. Looks like you have both. We have both, Iola said, and when she said it, the house sounded less condemned and more like a patient who had agreed to get out of bed. The day the first trash bin left full, neighbors clapped from porches like an orchestra for fools. The day the grant application went in, photographs, estimates, the lawyer's careful sentence making things legal without making them small, Iola put her hand on the box of ashes at the shop and said, "We're not done yet. But we're not hopeless." Hope is a muscle, it thickened. It made room in her arms for her granddaughter at last, a small body that smelled like library paste and apples. Her daughter came with the child and kissed her mother on the cheek in the careful way we kiss fragile things that have turned out to be durable. They argued softly about stupid things because love with history prefers to argue small first. Then they planned a dinner that would not happen at any house yet but would happen, all the same, under strings of lights someone had kept from a better summer. On a Wednesday that looked like any other, an envelope arrived addressed to Iola made Granger in a hand that was neither official nor a cousin to Bill's. Inside was a check, not modest, not rude, from a fund Zach would later call people who believe it matters where women sleep. No strings. Only a note, for a backdoor key and the woman who kept it. Iola sat on the bakery stairs and cried into a dish towel until Ms. Ortiz put a cup of chamomile into her hand and said, "Tea knows things." At night, she slept with the window that dreamed of the river open a crack and listened to the city breathe. Engines wrote lullabies. Footsteps wrote essays. Someone sang 3 blocks away and forgot the words and laughed, and it was enough. The morning the house passed the first inspection with a polite gold star, Iola walked into the kitchen and touched the place on the wall 2 inches left of the switch. "We're getting there," she told the dented paint. "We're getting there." The man in the suit came by with forms that were friendlier and chose not to be offended when nobody offered him coffee. He signed where the lawyer told him to. He said, "Good luck," and for the first time his mouth owned the words. Ellis showed up with a dog that adored everybody and a pair of work gloves that had once been clean. "I'm here," he said, and the sentence, simple, suspended heavy things. Zach stood in the doorway at dusk and looked at the woman he had walked into by accident and the life she had decided to take back. He lifted a hand. "Pie?" he asked. "Pie," she said. "And toast. And tea that knows things." She baked that night at the shop, ovens turning oil and rubber air into pecans and sugar in memory. Men who knew how to fix carburetors peeled apples without nicking themselves. Mara set plates like a general executes a campaign. Ms. Ortiz brought a quilt to put on the concrete where chairs failed to be comfortable. Vinny washed pans until his arms forgot skinny. They ate. They told the story of the night the power went out and the back door key glinted in candlelight like a star you could put in your pocket. They told it the way you tell stories when you're not trying to make them bigger, but they get bigger anyway because truth is a brawler with good manners. After, when the shop was quiet and the ovens clicked as they cooled, Iola stood at the shelf with the box and touched it with 2 fingers. "Home," she said, and the word did not care that the roof over it tonight was not the one that had heard it before. Home followed the word like a dog follows a whistle it recognizes from streets away. She stepped outside. The night leaned close, curious. The bikes rested, their chrome making brief constellations under street lamps. Zach leaned against the doorway, tired in a way that did not resent it. "Thank you," Iola told him. He shook his head. "We just filled the booths. You did the rest." She laughed. "We filled the booths," she corrected gently. The river, somewhere out there in the city's ribs, moved. The wind pushed the scent of it down a block that didn't know it was blessed. Iola breathed in the wet and the oil and the pecans that still hung in the air like a hymn. "Tomorrow," she said to the night. "Tomorrow we hang the new back door." And the night, which had not always been kind, said back, or seemed to, "I'll hold the flashlight." 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.